So for any law firm, migrations is a topic that is not really addressed very often because ideally the firm is not changing, a core component of their technology stack often. But when it does arise, it's something that requires a great level of planning and should be magnified in terms of the level of importance and the priority overall in the firm. Making sure that you take all of the data from your existing system and map it properly into the new system is critical, right? And it can set you up for a very productive and efficient next couple of years or major inefficiencies that plague you for the next several years. It is that critical. So, given that you're our director of client services, you're directly responsible for performing migrations in many of these firms. One, how do you advise firms to prepare for data migrations? And two, what are the things that you typically look out for? What are those common pitfalls that firms can fall into to find that their technology rollout is stalled?
Exactly. Yeah. One major area I think firms really need to take into account is how much data are you going to bring in, right? Do you want to bring it all in? Does it make sense to bring it all in? Is it really going to bring any benefit to you to have it all in? We always drive this idea of one central for everything. Yes, when you're coming from nothing and going into a legal practice system, absolutely you want to have everything centralized. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't hurt you in a negative way to not have that data inside your legal practice system, why bring it in? Why introduce this complexity? One thing that I always try to tell clients is garbage in, garbage out. Let's minimize the amount of stuff that we don't need to have in there that's going to clutter up, it's going to cause issues down the road that we're going to have to go through and spend substantial time cleaning up before we even bring it in.
Well, and that just brings up another great point, which is that, when firms are looking to define the amount of previous work that they're going to bring into their case management system, documents, time entries, invoices, contacts, these kind of things, there are certain things that make sense to house within the new platform, and there are certain things that it makes sense to purge, especially at a juncture in time like that where you're implementing a new system. I'll just break it down into its basic form, which is how do you advise clients on what data it makes sense to bring in to the new platform?
Yeah. A lot of times we kind of start with that initial question that I just said, right? What data do we want to bring in? And then we kind of break it down from there, right? Is there financial data that you have that you need to be able to have access to that you're going to be constantly referencing in this new system? Yes? Okay, then let's break it down even further than that. What data of that are you going to be referencing? Are you going to be referencing accounting reports? Are you going to be referencing, old KPI or key performance index data? Do you need to have that in the system? Again, it's a matter of we want to minimize what we're bringing in. And really the thought behind that is the time involved, not only on our side, your side, because they're going to have, they know their data, they're going to have input on it. How much time do you want to ultimately spend on old data, cleaning it up so that it's formatted and ready to come into this new legal practice system?
And I think also it begs the question, which is, do you need to modify that data going forward? Because a lot of times we find firms typically want to retain that data, but in those instances, it makes more sense to retain the data in an archive only format, whether you continue to pay for one license for your existing tool just to be able to view that archive data, or just simply creating reports, exporting that data, the context, the invoices, the time entries, things like that out of the old system if you don't need to modify them.
Exactly.
So, we've done both scenarios, right? Where we brought in large amounts of data from the past into the new platform. And we've also performed clean breakups where you have one existing set of data from the old system, you leave it there, and we start out with only fresh new data, right? When we're talking about the accounting system, we set up brand new chart of accounts for the firm. We set up brand new trust accounts, make sure that they're all balanced, that all the trust accounts balance.
But I see where you're going with it. Yeah, a lot of times it makes sense to really, understand what's being brought in. Again, going back to the initial question there, every time I ask it, do you want to bring in new data? Do you want to bring in only open active stuff? Or do you want to cut off and start fresh? Every single time, the initial answer, and it's a knee-jerk answer, is always bring in everything. and then I explain the work involved, and then they pull back that response very quickly.
Right, and most of the times it's not even appropriate to bring that information in.
Right.
It may seem like this data would be beneficial and even necessary in some circumstances to have, but again, like I mentioned, just having that data stored in an archival only version, read only, where you're not able to modify it, but you're able to reference back to it, that's sufficient for many firms, and they find that it makes it easier to get up to speed with the new platform because they're not wading through years and years of historical data that actually don't matter in the current context and aren't necessarily going to be able to need to be modified.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, that's just the initial part of it, right? You still have to go through and determine, okay, what does need to be modified? How do we need to modify it? How do we export all the data from our old account? You know, what if we're not going from one system to another system? We're going from nothing to something. You know, you really need to thoroughly map out, understand not only the target system of your migration, but the source as well. Where are you coming from? You know, and that's something that we've said in previous videos. If you don't do this correctly, firms that we've heard that haven't gone through this process properly, and you really end up in a world of hurt, even potentially opening yourself up to malpractice.
So all of this work is necessary in order to prepare the data to be imported into the new system.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's a new case management system. So when we're in the process of actually moving the data, you know, where the rubber meets the road, how does that process actually go?
Yeah, so a lot of times when you're actually doing the data migration, you're gonna run across what are called blackout periods. That's what we like to refer to them as. And I know it sounds scary, but really it's just a period of time where you can't touch the old system and you can't touch the new. And I know I didn't really take the fear factor out of that, but we very carefully plan and schedule very far out these blackout periods in our migration dates.
Before we go to the next component, how long are these blackout periods?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the amount of data that we're coming over, but even some of the larger firms, we're talking, you know, close to 100 firm members that we've migrated over, we're talking 2 to 3 days per section of the data migration, which typically, you know, I can make a whole video about that, but that breaks into core data, matter info, accounting data, you know, contact data, everything else. So we break it into sections, but a lot of times the main migration date is usually about 1 to 2 days. A lot of times we try to schedule that over the weekend.
We start the data migration process. We have these blackout periods pre-scheduled with the firm in order to, you know, ensure that the expectations are known and understood at the beginning. Data started to be migrated from platform A into platform B.
Yeah.
What are typically the things that we do in order to make sure that everything maps properly?
Yeah. A lot of the times what we do is we've created these templates that we utilize internally at Paragon that allows us to take data from either an old practice system or nothing and allow that to map to something. You know, and a lot of times we are going through all of these various templates that could include data on matters, data on contacts, contact names, emails, whatever it might be. We need to thoroughly ensure that that data all maps properly. After that, we're then going to apply that, process the data on the server side for these legal practice systems. And in a lot of cases, the document migration portion of it is not included. So that's something we need to process manually on our end. A lot of times it involves uploading, you know, so again, you can kind of see there's a structure to this. There's an order you must follow in order for this to be effective. So it's very important that you carefully map everything out.
Right. I mean, every platform is designed differently. You know, the way that the software is architected varies wildly. So what may be called a matter number in one system may be called a matter ID in another system. And it's on us to do the translation between those systems to make sure the information properly moves from one system to another.
Exactly.
We've had horror stories from firms who've tried to go through this process on their own.
Oh yeah.
Where simple things like whether the matter status, whether matter is actually open or closed, did not properly translate. So now it left hours of work for that firm to do after the fact, just to go through manually to go ahead and identify whether those matters are open or closed. So simple things like that, that's what we try to get in front of in that preparation planning stage, as well as the actual implementation, making sure it all maps properly.
Exactly. And even one step further, you know, I know it's probably on some of you guys' mind, How do you manage through these blackout periods? What if we have to schedule it during the week, right? What happens to the firm? Well, you can't just stop working. That's not an option, right? So, but we thought about that, right? We've gone through, we've identified, and a lot of times we have another set of templates that we've created that allows you to still input time entries, still track your work, what documents have been updated. A lot of this is just like a lot of other aspects of our service. We custom create it to each firm's needs. If there's certain documents that you need to have access to for sure over the next week during this blackout period, we're going to ensure that we set those aside for you alone so that you can work on them. Once we're in the new system, you can just drop them in the new system and you're good to go.
And then lastly, the post-migration phase. This is something that a lot of firms consider the work done.
Yeah.
Once the migration's performed and they have their scheduled go live date, as we refer to it as, a lot of the firms believe that this is where the migration work ends.
Yeah, they're waving the checkered flag.
Absolutely, right? So what really happens after this period of time when the bulk of the data has been input, and now we enter into this tertiary phase? What are the things that we're doing both on the back end and also with the client?
Yeah, a lot of times, it feels like you're done, right? You just went through this large process of getting your data in the system. You're ready to hit the ground running, right? But before we do that, my team goes through carefully and ensures that every part of the data that we're importing was properly mapped. Even after we've done all of our planning, we've had situations where we need to go in and quickly update a lot of stuff. Notes didn't quite come in right. Okay, we need to go and do a mass update on that to ensure that it comes in properly. Contact middle names may not have come in. Okay, we need to go in and make sure that comes in as well. So it's really a lot of what I like to consider the cleanup phase. The final part of that is just to make sure that the data that is in there properly. We have everything we got from the old system that we can get into the new system, and that the data is ready to be used by the firm.
So it's a verification of sorts. It's where we validate the data that we brought in against what we're expecting to be there.
Yeah.
And ensure that if there's any lapses in data, in the way that something communicated from the old system to the new, we take care of it. And it's my assumption, but you're the one who does the work, so you tell me, but it's my assumption that it's much easier to clean up the data in this phase, where before the data has been modified and applied to other matters. So tell me about that process. Does it tend to be easier in this phase to clean up the data?
Yeah, a lot of times it's easier in this phase. It's the firm is in a position to where they're still like trying to figure the system out. So it's easier for us to go in, clean everything up, make sure that we're ready to roll. Data is in the right spots. Everything is where it needs to be, and no data is missing, what is most important there. And once we verified that, now we can very confidently go through with that firm and ensure that, again, just like we said in another video, the training, make sure everyone understands where everything is, how everything operates, and we go from there. So
okay, and I think that's the training process in its entirety, right?
Yeah, a lot of times with the training, it really does. Again, everything we do is cohesive. So the training tends to butt up right against the go live date, which also involves the migration date and the verification and all this stuff. It's a lot of moving pieces at once, which is typically why you try to hire somebody outside of the firm that specializes in this type of work to make sure it's cohesive.
I see. Okay, yeah, so that's the part you were thinking about. I was thinking there was actually one more phase, which is, give me a second. Crack open bottles of their beverage of choice because they have now made it through this arduous migration process.
Oh yeah.
Is this an official step, part 5?
You know what? It's unofficially official. You know what? Give me that bottle.